Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to our session where we are trying to figure out what local communities and municipalities are in need of in terms of Arctic observations, and where we are also hearing about 3 services we are creating in Arctic Passion, an EU project. And may I ask, yes, to put it on. So Arctic Passion and the Arctic Mayors Forum are starting this event, are co-hosting this event. And we will give very short introductions to each of those, the Arctic Passion Project, which I will do, and Patty will say a few words on what the Arctic Mayors Forum is about. Then we will have, I think, a short video, which maybe, Patty, you would say a few words on what this is going to be. And then we hear 3 presentations from the Arctic Passion Services. And afterwards, we have 3 distinguished panelists which join the panel here and with whom we want to discuss about Arctic observation needs and information needs. Okay, so let's get started. Arctic Passion, you may wonder what that's about. Of course, we are passionate about it, but it's not about emotions so much, but it's about how to improve an Arctic observing system. A large EU project which started in 21. It will still run for 2 more years. We have more than 40 partner organizations, including indigenous communities around the Arctic, well, almost around, as you may have heard the discussions in the previous session about the difficulties collaborating with Russia. We also had Russian communities and Russian partners, which we cannot collaborate with anymore, but we are trying to intensify the collaboration with everyone else. Next slide, please, or okay, maybe I can do that myself. Yes. So, a warm welcome again to this session where we are talking about why environmental observation services matter. A conversation with Arctic communities about how environmental information can inform climate policy. And this is a co-hosted, as I said, with the Arctic Mayors Forum, but in particular 2 local organizations which are also partner in Arctic Passion, and this is the NPI and the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University. So, the services we are presenting are just some part of what we do. There's not the time to elaborate on all of these activities we are doing, including all of the services on this meeting. But I just will tell you what are the services we are creating, just to give you the idea on the range of activities. So there's an indigenous-led event database, which is based on community-based monitoring, oral histories, indigenous and local knowledge, which is going to be or currently being created as part of Arctic Passion, with involving a lot of indigenous communities. A Pan-Arctic permafrost change service, which you will hear about in a few minutes. A state-of-the-Arctic environmental information hub, which is going to be presented here today. What we are not going to show today is the integrated fire risk management service. Everyone is probably aware about the increasing number of wildfires in the Arctic regions, and there's a service which is built up on that issue. We will hear, though, about a local atmospheric pollutant forecast, which is developed at our partner in Italy, in JRC. And then we have 3 more, a service which is improving safety for Arctic shipping in polar seas. There will be a presentation on this in the meetings tomorrow, I guess that was. There's one on Arctic marine climate change, noise pollution impacts on marine mammals in a regional fjord in Qaanaaq in Greenland, together with Greenlandic fishermen and women, and a lake ice service which is developed in Finland for having more safety on Scandinavian lakes. And with that, I would come to the so-called sub-national policy making level, which is a phrase I didn't know anything about before, but it's about how to interact with people who are making decisions or preparing decisions on a local or regional level. And we have, as I said, 3 representatives for this level of policy and decision making with us here. One of the activities in Arctic Passion is indeed to enhance the interaction and the communication with those decision makers on this level. And this is just an example of our colleagues at the Arctic Center in Rovaniemi, who have been making interviews with many of those policymakers to understand their information needs. And that's a lot of activity which is done in collaboration with the Arctic Mayors Forum. And here I have the chance to give the word to Patty to explain us what's the Arctic Mayors Forum and what it's about. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so lovely to be back at Arctic Frontiers and to see so many friendly faces, but also to see a lot of new faces in the room as well. So my name is Patty Bruns. I am the Secretary General for the Arctic Mayors Forum. I'm not sure if you're seeing my last slide. Oh, hopefully not my, thank you. Hopefully, thank you. That's all you needed to know. If we could go to my first slide, that would be great. So, well, that's coming on the screen. The Arctic Mayors Forum is an important actor on the Arctic governance front. And on the second slide, I can do that. On this slide here, you'll see a word cloud of our current members. We are, of course, recruiting new members. So if you are the member of a community and you think this sounds, what I'm going to present sounds interesting, please be in touch with me. Because really what we are about is making sure that Arctic voices from across the Arctic, that those voices are really heard at the municipal and community level. So here's a tiny snippet of history. We sort of came together in Fairbanks in 2017 and did a lot of work to get to last year at Arctic Frontiers, which is when we actually officially opened the Secretariat of the Arctic Mayors Forum. And I can tell you that it has been a very, very busy year. And we are really, really happy to be partnering with Arctic Passion because it brings to us this opportunity to talk about the kinds of data that's actually needed for our decision makers in communities and municipalities to serve their residents and their community members. So our vision is really to make sure that local communities, through the participation of their mayors and their community leaders, to actually have an active voice at the Arctic governance tables, whether that be regional or pan-Arctic or indeed global. And why are we doing this? We're really doing this so that our citizens can live lives in the Arctic that are sustainable, that are resilient, that are thriving, that are fulfilling, that are meaningful. So these are really big words, but I have to say that you only need to be in the room with a group of mayors to know that they actually believe these things really, 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 really strongly. So some of our priorities, we met in October in Reykjavik, and we actually just opened up the floor and said, what do we want to work on? And we have these sort of 4 baskets of work that will always sort of be there. And I think it's sustainable economic development, attractiveness and retention in our communities to meet the growing demands on Arctic communities and municipalities, youth. And a really, really big one is actually working with our partners and with the Arctic Council. But we added a strategic focus to our work for the next 3 years. And that strategic focus is actually on the health and well-being of our citizens. And you might say, okay, well, what are we doing talking about that in a session about data? And I would argue that this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen, because scientific data does impact the health and well-being of our citizens in a variety of ways. And we're going to talk about some of them today. I like to show this just because it kind of is interesting. Arctic Mayors Forum currently represents 1.14 million people in the Arctic region. So this is not above the Arctic Circle, but these are communities that kind of self-identify as Arctic. I just say that because we have communities like Umeå and also Anchorage in our membership. But I think that this is really interesting when you think about how many people are in the Arctic and who we currently represent. We do have membership from 7 of the Arctic states, so we suspended our cooperation with Russia. Unfortunately, that is how it has to be for the time being. And we have active partnerships with over 20 stakeholders in the Arctic, and that list grows all the time. So we work within the AMF to build our membership and also to make sure that our members are keeping our messaging on track. We work with Arctic partners such as Arctic Passion, and really through that we sort of have a global impact as well. So we do a lot of activities, including things like Arctic Frontiers and at many different Arctic gathering points. And we represent ourselves in a variety of different projects and with a number of different stakeholders. Just conscious of the time, so thank you. We come back to where we started. I'm going to now just say a couple of words about the video that you're about to see. This is a video that is presented by Adam Stepien from the University, or from the Arctic Center in Rovaniemi. And I had the opportunity to join a number of the mayors that you saw on the screen in Rovaniemi at Rovaniemi Spirit. And we had a session where we talked about a lot about the issues that we are discussing today. But Adam really gives we wanted to summarize that conversation as a bit of a jumping off point for today's conversation. So let's just watch the video. Thank you so much.
Good day. I'm Adam Stepien from the Arctic Center of the University of Lapland, and together with my colleague Pavel Tkach, we were asked to share some insights from Arctic Passion's engagement with local and regional decision makers in the Arctic. In last year's November, we organized, in cooperation with the Arctic Mayors Forum, a session at the Arctic Spirit Conference in Rovaniemi dedicated to green transition planning at the local level in the Arctic, as well as a workshop with municipal decision makers on evidence-based policymaking. Among others, our panelists discussed challenges and benefits of cooperating with private sector in green transition actions, as well as engaging the youth and indigenous peoples in climate mitigation and adaptation. The conference panelists and workshop participants shared success stories and challenges from their municipalities, and it's worth here to share these examples. Representative of Juneau in Alaska said that community engagement is at the core of green transition initiatives. Official from Swedish Luleå highlighted that local governments cannot wait for national decision makers and need to act on their own. A councillor from Reykjavik discussed better planning, considering gender dimension, and working together with other neighboring municipalities in order for the green transition action to be long-term, just, and effective. An official from Rovaniemi stressed that smaller, even micro interventions can together lead to larger success at the local level. The mayor of Yellowknife showcased actions in the field of waste management, which is a major challenge for Arctic municipalities and overlooked major contribution to green transition and emissions reduction. Participants raised a number of challenges. First, changing national policies can make the green transition long-term planning at local level quite difficult. Actions that are planned based on subventions or tax policies can become economically unsustainable if national policies change, as can be the case, for example, with fossil fuel-free transport. Second, universities and research institutes located in Arctic towns can play an important role in supporting local policymaking. However, while in some towns this cooperation is smooth, even formalized, in others it is almost non-existent. Arctic academic community and local decision makers should try to address this gap and develop long-term relationships. Third, the challenge for evidence-based policymaking is often not the availability of data itself, but the public trust in data. We need to put more efforts into trust building among Arctic communities in the reliability and relevance of scientific information. This is a task not only for scientists. Fourth, Some Northern municipalities lack appropriate benchmarks for measuring success with respect to green transition. National and international comparisons, for example with large cities in Central Europe, are often inappropriate. This is something that could be tackled through cooperation of Arctic towns and regions, as they share various characteristics and challenges, and their actions can constitute a better reference for their colleagues across the circumpolar north. There are currently many opportunities for addressing these challenges, both jointly and in each Arctic town, and we hope that you will be able to continue these and related conversations in Tromsø. Thank you.
That was a... Hello? It's me. Yeah, this was a very nice summary of the session in Rovaniemi, and now we start with our first service developed in Arctic Passion, and I ask Ilaria Crotti to the stage. She's working at the Joint Research Center in Italy, one of our partner organizations, and I give the word to you. I think you can explain better exactly what is the title of your presentation.
Is it?
This one is working, this is not.
So, this one.
Does it work now?
Okay. So, hello everyone, and I'm very happy to be here today to show you what we are doing at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission to contribute to this amazing project of Arctic Passion. So my name is Ilaria Crotti, and I'm one of the developers of a local atmospheric pollutant forecast service, but it's also developed with the help of the Italian National Research Council. Okay. Air pollution nowadays represents one of the first 10 risk factors for deaths worldwide, and today is placed at the 6th position according to the statistics of 2019. And it's just below, smoking, high blood pressure, obesity, and so on. So it's really a factor that affects our health. There are many pollutants in the atmosphere that are like sulfate, nitrates, particulate matter, ozone, that at different level can affect our body. They can produce very adverse effect on our brain or on our cardiovascular system, respiratory problems, even cancer. For this reason, it's very important to study atmospheric pollutants and how and their concentration and how they spread. In our services, we are focusing on PM10, which stands for particulate matter, and 10 is for the dimension. 10 are is the dimension, which is 10 micrometers. So those particles are very fine and very small. Could get inside our lungs when we breathe. Their chemical composition is very wide and is very heterogeneous, so depending on the source, those particles could be composed by sulfate, nitrates, organic compounds, and so on. For this reason, the World Health Organization decreased the recommended concentrations, since there is no safe level for PM10 in the atmosphere, and nowadays for daily mean concentrations, the recommended one is 45 microgram per cube meter, and the annual mean concentration is 15 microgram per cube meter. So if we focus on North Europe, that you can see in the red circle, not according to 2021 data, not all North Europe stands inside the annual mean concentration limit, even if North European countries are doing a lot of efforts to reduce their concentration of PM10. For this reason, VR pollution forecast is essential because it will help to mitigate the pollution, and especially in case of wildfires, as also Michael said before, it will help for emergency preparedness, even if wildfires are not so common in North Europe. This is a general approach that will be helpful also for other communities, for example, in Canada. And our forecast aims at improving the concentration forecast using machine learning models, and the approach is based on using the CAMS Copernicus PM10 forecast, which is the staple PM10 forecast released by the Copernicus Atmospheric Service for Europe, and adding PM10 measurements from monitoring stations in that are located in Northern European countries, and altogether will be put inside a machine learning model that will help to produce a local forecast which is more tailored for those areas. And we are also developing a dashboard, which is a website that will be helpful for citizens and communities to visualize the forecast and the real-time data of PM10, as long as to download the data. So we published last year a study on, as I said, on our approach, which consists in using machine learning to improve the forecast. And I'll come this way. Our input data, it's not working. Okay, no, it's not working on the screen. Nothing, okay. So on the left side, we can see the input data. So we chose 6 Arctic stations. And we used 3 years data from both stations, along with the Copernicus atmospheric forecast models, and we used all together as input for our different machine learning models. And the results were very encouraging because we got an increasing in the forecast performances, which means that the forecast was very close to what we observed in the measurements. So this will be the final product of our service, which is a website, which will be interactive, and it will include 200 stations from the European Environmental Agency and the Finnish Meteorological Institute, where and in this website we will show the daily data and our forecast. In addition, users will be able to see the historical record, compare it to the forecast, and to download the data. So, as I said, this is just a preliminary version of the website, so we're trying to develop it and make it more captivating, so it will be easier to see the concentration of PM10 using different colors, and the platform, in addition, will be available to everyone upon registration. And users will be able to download the forecast for every day. So we'd like to hear from you. What do you think about? So this from the demo that I showed you. So if you think that you need any changes about that, or if it would be helpful to have a longer forecast. Nowadays we are providing 24-hour forecasts, but if you think about that 48 hours or 72 hours forecast would be useful, and if users would like to have a daily bulletin, so every suggestion is welcome. And if you want to help to improve our service, here there is a short survey in Slido that you can access anytime. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. And if you have any questions, keep them in your mind. We will, at the end of the session here, we will have an interactive discussion with you in the plenary. But now I would give the word to Guido Grosse. He's working at the Permafrost Group. He's leading it at the Alfred Wegener Institute's branch in Potsdam, and he's working out with his team the Permafrost service of Arctic Passion.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Guido Grosse. Yes, so we are working on the permafrost service of the Arctic Passion project, and so permafrost is a very widespread phenomenon in the Arctic, of course. Recent estimates suggest that about 5 million people live in the permafrost regions in different sizes of communities, indigenous and non-indigenous communities. And we developed a service to bring information about permafrost and permafrost changes to those communities. So very often this data is complex, scientific data, and breaking it down in a digestible way is very useful for communities, we think. We call the service the Arctic Landscape Explorer, short ALEX. And so some of the other people mentioned here helped developing that tool. So Tillman especially and Ingmar provided data in the development of the tool, and the others, Anna and Hugues, are involved in other parts of the service. So permafrost thaw is actually happening in step with rapidly warming temperatures in the Arctic. This nice map of the Arctic shows data from the ESA Climate Change Initiative Permafrost project. So it's based on remote sensing and modeling, and it shows that the temperature in the upper surface of the permafrost at 2 meters depth between 1997 and 2019 was warming considerably in several regions, especially in northern Eurasia. And so this is actually affecting not just the permafrost and the ecosystems in these regions, but also, of course, the infrastructure and communities. So what does it mean, permafrost that thaws in the Arctic? Permafrost is actually consisting of the active layer, or not the permafrost, the active layers on top of the permafrost, so it's the seasonally thawed layer, and then underneath we have the perennially or permanently frozen ground. And very often this contains ice, not everywhere, but in many places we have ice, and if this ice melts when permafrost thaws, we have not just the loss of this old ground ice, but we have deep thaw subsidence in cases. We have a change of hydrological systems, the release of old carbon. Permafrost is a very big carbon store with global implications, and as a consequence also of the hydrological, of the ground ice change, the damage to infrastructure. So increase in maintenance costs, increase in costs from damages. In the permafrost service, we follow 2 goals, actually 2 objectives. So the first objective is actually to provide an update of data from the Global Terrestrial Network for Permafrost. It's a grassroots network of many scientific partners around the Arctic collecting permafrost temperature data. So there was one publication that summarized 10-year data of permafrost temperature in the past, and showed that permafrost is warming everywhere in the Arctic, and in the subarctic, in the mountain permafrost region, and even in the Antarctic. Our objective 2 is actually to provide maps of surface changes related to permafrost thaw, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation here, at very high resolution, building on remote sensing data sets. So the goal here is actually to make these complex remote sensing data available to communities through a tailored web portal that specifically targets non-scientific users, so different types of communities, stakeholders, and rights holders in the Arctic. So Arctic communities are built on permafrost in many places. So this is an example of the hamlet of Paulatuk in northwestern Canada. So we clearly see different formations that indicate there's a lot of ice in the ground, so ice wedge polygons, for example. And if this ice melts, ground subsides, and we have damages to infrastructure. So these communities are directly threatened from permafrost thaw because they are sitting on ice rich ground. So this is an example from the recently published Arctic Permafrost Atlas, which also features very nice maps and information panels on permafrost in the Arctic. There are different types of disturbances that affect permafrost and that lead to thawing of permafrost. Here are some of the main disturbances on this slide. Tundra and forest fires are very extensive, especially in the boreal region with permafrost, but also river erosion, thaw subsidence, Lake drainage is important, infrastructure changes on roads or pipelines, for example, coastal erosion, a very important topic for communities in the Arctic along the coast, thaw slumping, and lake expansion. So these lakes in permafrost regions very often expand and grow over time. They are eating into permafrost. So with our remote sensing-based change data set, we are actually looking by now at a pan-Arctic region. We started developing this data set based on Landsat data, looking at 30 by 30 meter pixels for certain transects in the Arctic. And so this method was established and published already. And now we are looking at the entire region of the permafrost domain and cover a temporal area or temporal domain of 2003 to 2022. We're only looking at the summer imagery, but in the end we look at trends, so how things change in this data set of 20 years. And we use so-called Tesla cap transform. So this data is multispectral, has many bands, the satellite data. And the Tesla cap transform calculates indices, in this case the brightness, greenness, and wetness, which are indicative of soil conditions, surface conditions, vegetation, and the surface wetness. And the combination of this gives us information about how the surface changes and the trends. So this is what it looks like if we summarize this, if we compress all this dense data of 20 years for each pixel, 30 by 30 meters in the entire Arctic permafrost domain into colorful pictures. And in this case, the more flashy the color, the more intense the change, basically. So this is an example from Kotzebue in northwestern Alaska. But I will go into detail. So what do we know from this data? Or how do we visualize that data? So the challenge is really like for non-scientific users to interpret the data. And so we use this color triangle here that shows trends between those three different parameters, the brightness, the greenness, and the wetness. And so we have, for example, a wetness gradient going from the upper left to the lower right corner, so from drier to wetter. And the colors here specify what we see in the map actually. So lake drainage, for example, would show up as these very yellow dots or yellow areas in the map. On the other hand, areas that become wetter or become flooded or coastal erosion, for example, land from transitions of land to sea, would show up blue in this map. Conversely, so if you look at the greenness gradient from the upper right to the lower left, we see a vegetation increase towards the lower left. And so fire scars are a nice example how this shows up. So in more older fire scars, we see vegetation succession, and then we see more greenish colors. But in more fresh fire scars, we see a loss in vegetation, a decrease over those 20 years, and then we see these other colors. For the brightness, we see from the lower part to the upper part of the triangle, we see a shift in the colors. And so, for example, the Fort Knox gold mine in central Alaska near Fairbanks, it's an open pit gold mine, has these flashy red colors. And infrastructure development in northwestern Canada, near Inuvik, for example, there's a gravel mine along the new highway of the Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk highway, and new buildings in Inuvik, they show up as red or dark purple in this case. So we have all this information on a pan-Arctic scale. And a few examples here. This is Cape Blossom in western Alaska, just south of the city of Kotzebue. And here we see all these blue colors along the coastline and these estuaries, which indicates so there's a lot of coastal erosion happening in this area. And so these estuaries are flooding, getting inundated over this 20 years time period. And so actually the yellow square at the bottom there is an area where a new port facility was planned so far. So it's of course a really peculiar spot to plant a port facility. So the road has been partially constructed already, and it's really difficult for the community now to decide how to continue with that. So having this information like in advance would be very helpful for communities for planning purposes. Another example from Alaska, northern Alaska this time, the city or the village of Point Lay on the Chukchi coast. And what we see here is a lake drainage event. So the communities in Arctic permafrost regions often are depending on freshwater sources in the form of lakes, freshwater lakes. So in this case, the lake, which is shown in the left on the Sentinel image from summer 2016 in July, and then in October, disappeared because the river tapped into the lake. So the river migrated, eroded into the lake drained, And so suddenly the freshwater source of the village was gone. And so that's what we see as well in the data set, so showing up as this orange color here. There are other processes visible, again, coastal erosion, just south of the village along the coast, barrier island migration in front of the coast of the village, and then lake expansion. And so in the previous session, there was a lot of discussion about Russia and how do we cover the blind spots there for permafrost, but also for any other research. So for permafrost, to some extent, we can at least cover what is happening to the landscape with this kind of data set. So it allows monitoring of permafrost regions currently inaccessible. And this is an example of the Bovanenkovo oil and gas field area on the Yamal Peninsula in Western Siberia. It shows lots of new oil and gas infrastructure that were built there over the last 20 years, lake erosion, a new airport, lake drainage. So there's a lot of landscape dynamic in this area, some of it related to the infrastructure construction and the landscaping. So the Alex tool, actually. So how do we bring this data set to the people as a web portal? The aim is really to provide an easy-to-use map service showing and explaining permafrost landscape changes. And so there's a QR code, so if you want to, feel free to scan it. This is basically the release now. The online tool is basically a website accessible by web browser. It can be used from a PC, from any regular laptop, tablet, or even a smartphone. On the smartphone, it's a little bit limited because of the size of the screen, but you can browse around at least. It's distributed as a web map service as well, which helps people who are a bit more familiar with geographic information systems, so they can pull in the entire data set into their GIS system, work with it. It's optimized for fast loading times, which is also a critical issue, of course, in many Arctic communities, which are remote. And it offers a pan-Arctic view, so as well as a local view. So what is happening around your village and so on, everybody can check basically. And then we plan to integrate story maps to better understand like what is the thing, what are the processes. And this is the second last slide. So we had some initial community consultations in Western Alaska, mostly in Nome Kotzebue, a little bit in northwestern Canada. We continue this year, actually, with certain actors in these communities. And so the final slide, this is what it looks like as a tool. So there's a map on the left where you can browse around. There will be story maps on the right. There's a little bit of explanation. You can switch between high-resolution data sets and our change map and play around with it and learn what is happening around your community in the Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guido. A very exciting tool. I'm very much looking forward to that being used by people. And I saw a few people taking pictures, which is great. I hope you check it out. And now we come to the last but not least presentation of a service with Arild Sundfjord, working at the NPI here locally in Tromsø. And he is developing a web interface to get more information on what is the state of the Arctic. And I give the word to you here.
Great, thanks very much. It's a bit humbling to go after Ilaria and Guido because they have very advanced services at advanced stages of development. So I will now take you into something that is more in the making. But what that means is that we are also still very much open for feedback and input on what we're doing. So I guess we're okay with that. So what I will present is a web service that is supposed to present a very broad and representative view of the state of changes of climate and environment across the entire Arctic. So that means you look at biology, you look at cryosphere, you look at atmosphere, you look at oceans. And to do that, you need to look at a variety of data sources or observation sources. So we use remote sensing. That's often super useful because it provides consistent data for a large area. But we don't have remote sensing data for everything that we want to show. But biology, for example, is typically difficult if you want to get into details on that. So in addition to remote sensing, we integrate what we can call in situ or local measurements from sensors or from people counting individual animals or whatever. and also community-based and indigenous monitoring programs. So we want to integrate across disciplines, and we want to integrate across methods of observation. They all are part of the picture, giving us the impression of what state this system, the climate and environment, including the ecosystem, is. So the disclaimer at the beginning is that we are not showing everything that we could show. I mean, there's a lot of data out there. So we have chosen a few indicators or variables, different names for this, but only a few representative ones is what we start by showing. Some from biology, some from the cryosphere, some from the ocean, etc. So we're not trying to show everything. The other caveat is that we cannot show local details in the same way as these previous services have done. So the main purpose of this service is much more to provide context for the local to regional stage, so that you can understand how your local community relates to other areas of the Arctic that are also changing. Maybe some areas have gone through, let's say, a development or change state that your community is soon moving into, or you're at the edge, the forefront of the ongoing changes. It's good to have some context to both for your own planning, but also for, let's say, speaking with the community that you live in to make people understand what is going on the Pan-Arctic level. So that's a very long introduction to the first slide here. This is not my work. I'm coordinating this in collaboration with the Norwegian Met Institute, Grid Arendal. We get a lot of feedback and guidance from Snow Change Cooperative in Finland, and also from Alfred Wegener Institute and other partners in the project. So I'll run you quickly through the way that we plan to fully develop this service. You will arrive at the front page. This is a working version, so it will be a bit more elaborate than this. But from this, you can choose which domain to go into. It could be going into the cryosphere domain to learn more about permafrost or sea ice or snow, or you could go through the terrestrial domain as such. So we'll find a way of navigating. The underlying structure will be something like this, where you have these overarching domains or topics, and then the individual indicators below that. So some illustrations here from the biological sphere, from cryosphere, etc. So these would be sub-pages then elaborating on the different themes. One example I want to show, and this is one of the more difficult ones, a large marine mammal. There are very few animals for which we have pan-Arctic coverage. Bowhead is one of those very few that we can actually depict in a pan-Arctic way. So you will get then to sort of an objective number-based front page that gives you some basic information about this indicator, in this case a large whale. And then later on we want to take you into the more regional levels, and then we include the community or indigenous-based knowledge and give that the strongest position in saying how this indicator is important for people's lives, how this indicator is connected to other things. How do bowheads get influenced by the changes in the sea ice coverage and the seasonality of sea ice? How does this impact people's lives? So that's the angle that we have chosen for the whole service, is to integrate the sort of objective number-based changes with the experienced changes. So this is just an example of how we could move into a region. We don't have the polished text yet in place for this one. We need to consult those that are concerned with it before we actually fill it with selected text. But this would be an example of how you dive somewhat more locally, although not super local for an indicator like this. Another indicator on land is caribou and reindeer. For now, reindeer is not shown as something that is changing, because that is influenced by many other factors than only the environmental changes. It's being influenced by management and husbandry practices, etc., on top of climate change. So what you see here is the large herds across the different regions, and how some of them are actually doing quite well and others are doing less well. And again, for this indicator, we will dive more locally and provide more information on how this is experienced locally. Now, I've said a couple of times that we can't go very local, but for some variables we can do that. One of those is sea ice, which has really great coverage from remote sensing. So for that we can go from this, what is shown here is the annual cycle in different years of sea ice coverage in the entire Arctic. But you can go local and go to the Barents Sea and show that as maps, and you can show that as changes through seasons for different years. And you can do that down to the daily basis or daily level. And this can, of course, be refined even further into local areas. Now, we are not going to do that for all variables in this service. So this is more an illustration of what can be done in the future if people see a need for it and we get more data, especially on these biological indicators. And I think that is what I had. That's a quick run through.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Arild. So as you see, we are covering a lot of different scales with the services. And now I would like to ask our three panelists to enter the stage. And Patty, would you just give an intro? Yes.
Sure. So now Michael's gonna moderate this discussion. So I'm just gonna introduce our three panelists. So first we have Anniken Meren, who's the Strategic Development Officer at the Municipality of Umeå. So just go on up and take the stage. Agneta Pedersen Evertsen, a Climate and Environment Advisor here in Tromsø Kommune. And Brynjar Andersen Sos, who is a project leader at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. Brynjar has also participated recently in an Arctic policy hackathon that Arctic Mayors Forum did with the Gordon Foundation and the Government of Canada. So he's wearing a couple of hats today, which he does very well. So over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Patty, and a very warm welcome to the three of you. Thank you for making time and sharing your knowledge and needs and interests in terms of Arctic observations for communities. And with that, I would like to give each of you the floor to say a few words about your work, your vision on the topic of the session, and maybe also reflect already on some of what you took away from the presentations on the services, but also with a more general aspect, depending on what you want to say. And maybe we just start here on this side with Annika.
Thank you. So my name is Annika Meren. I work at the city of Umeå, which is a middle-sized municipality in the north of Sweden. Though in the Arctic context, it's quite large. But we see ourselves in the European context and we're quite small. So my main interest as a climate mitigation officer at the municipality is understanding the big picture and not as much very specific data and environmental information. I'm not the one monitoring specific areas, although we have quite large problems with air quality in Umeå during the winters. So I really liked the service you presented. But as in my profession, I need to understand enough to work and suggest actions to move us forward. But again, what's important is that, and you also show that actually these IPCC statements that the climate change is happening much faster in the Arctic, or very local observations. Our Sports and Leisure department, they have seen, okay, we don't have snow in Umeå, what to do with skiing and our skiing areas and all these promotion of skiing in Umeå. I need data to be made real with maps, as you presented some of them, but also films, stories. We try to use a lot of storytelling. We need to have these scenarios in order to people to understand what actions they need to implement. Some of you said this about trust building. That's very important for us as well. And these film stories could help us to build trust. Okay, we know what we are doing. We know what actions what we need to implement, and so on. And my job is to convince politicians, local policymakers, businesses, citizens, every actor in the local community, as well as national level and up to the European level, to lower our emissions. But it's still locally very hard to comprehend, okay, the climate change is happening rapidly in the Arctic region. What's that? It's very hard to understand. So this is my point. The data need to be translated into understandable pictures.
Thank you. Should I just continue? Yes. All right, I'll just continue. I'm Agnete, and I work at Tromsø, here locally at the municipality. And I'm more hands-on with the data on pollution specifically myself. But what I want, or what we need, is we have a very wide, or we have many subjects that we need to implement in our management in the municipality. And I see that especially when it comes to area management, which is something the municipality is very important for. We need a lot of data that we need to take into consideration to make all the decisions of whether it's going to be say a hospital somewhere, or buildings that are important. And what I think is important is to get data on what is relevant to make decisions on based on the legislation. That's what we have to base ourselves on. And that's something I often see is lacking. An example I have is where we recently worked on coastal planning related to aquaculture, where we lacked a lot of data on the nature and pollution from or in the water bodies locally, which made it difficult to make decisions based on new legislation on water environment. And then we in the municipality sat there and we tried to work out what we were gonna decide based on the data we already had, but it wasn't enough. So that's something we need for sure. And that's also why I think it's very important for us in the municipality and the organizations that gather these data to have a closer communication to get what we need, basically, to make the decisions that are very important for the changes that we see, both for the environment and the climate. So that's probably the most important thing I had to say. And obviously, I completely agree with you as well on your, yeah.
Thank you. I want to start by rooting this in the Arctic and why we're discussing this specifically for the Arctic, because a lot of things we're going to say today, and that's already been said, is true for anywhere in the world when it comes to monitoring environment and climate data. But the Arctic is special, as we're all aware. It will be hit sooner and harder and more obviously by the climate changes and environmental changes than most of the rest of the world. This means that the Arctic can kind of function like an early warning system for the rest of the world, showing us what the effects will be, how bad they could be, and how quickly they're coming. And in addition to that, the local communities in the Arctic can be heavily impacted by these changes. So we need to be ready for them, we need to be informed on them in a timely manner, like ideally before they happen, so we can adapt and prepare and meet those challenges as they come around. This is especially true for indigenous groups, and we've already seen that with the reindeer herding in Norway, for example. So that's a huge part why I think this is specifically an important issue when we're discussing the Arctic and discussing policy in the Arctic. Now I'm going to put on my like local politician hat and discuss like how these tools can be used, because climate and environmental policy and science is complicated. There's a lot of data, there's huge amounts of data being produced all the time, and surprisingly, it turns out most politicians and decision makers don't have a PhD in climate science. So they need to be informed before they make those decisions, and that information they're presented with must be unbiased, subjective, and correct. And a lot of times that is a huge issue, because getting that data translated from the researchers to decision makers is a hard process. And as a former politician myself, we really like to see the good number go up, bad number go down kind of solutions. And a lot of time that's not what it's like in the beginning. It needs to be translated into that. And these kind of tools, I think, will make those decisions a lot easier for decision makers and make the information more available and make sure that they know what they're agreeing to and what they're deciding. Because they need to understand the effects of their decisions, because politicians at the local, regional, national, international level are making huge decisions every year that are going to affect the environment and the climate for years to come. Those decisions need to be well informed. Another issue here, or possible opportunity here, is the democratization of the climate discussions and the environmental discussions. A lot of normal people will also, using these kind of tools, be able to look into data and be informed themselves. And I think that is a huge, can be hugely important for the democratic discussion and the public discussion and discourse around these issues. I think it will help to engage people when they can look up the data themselves, check out this kind of information themselves, be informed themselves, not just having to trust the word of someone they don't know, but being able to look into data and understand it through tools that make the data more available. And, democratically speaking, as a person who believes very strongly in democracy, this allows people to make informed decisions when they're going to their local elections, regional elections, national elections. Knowing the information will help them make decisions for themselves based on this data. And I think that is a huge democratic win, that people can, to a greater degree understand environmental and climate issues. And all of this, and I'm really happy that that's already been mentioned, and I think it's important that we keep this in mind in any discussion about environmental monitoring, climate monitoring, is involving, working together with, including and listening to local and indigenous communities. We cannot monitor these kind of issues and these kind of groups from the outside. They have to be involved, they have to own the projects, they have to be part of the decisions that are made in these kind of projects. And I'm really happy to see a lot of people are getting that into their heads and understanding that you have to have the local and indigenous communities involved throughout the entire project.
Yeah, thank you very much. All very valuable and mind-bending issues you raise. We will come to questions related to the potential role of the Arctic Mayors Forum in a few minutes. But from my own background and the background of Arctic Passion, which is a research project which is aiming to improve the Arctic observing system, we are of course curious, where do you see the potential role of, let's say, science or science organizations, or those organizations which are responsible for deciding which observations are being made on the large scale, or which provide information to the local scale. How do you see the role of these organizations? And I would like to be a bit more specific, in particular when it comes to communication. So you, of course, are in the role of communicating information to your the people in your communities or in your municipalities. But also you described that you need to get access to certain data, to certain information. And on that part, what is it that you need? So, for example, you mentioned the difficulty in getting the data with this one example of the water quality. And if I may just add on to this question, where do you see the best potential for getting this kind of information? Is that something which has to do with not enough information, what kind of data are available and where? Or is it a question of the format of the data? Or would you be interested in more established communication channels to specific, let's say, organizations where you can raise an issue, a data need, and then get information back on where this could be found? Something in that direction. Where do you see the way forward to solve your problems?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us in that work specifically was probably, yes, both gaining access to the data that we needed, but also seeing that it wasn't there. And this was related to a change in the legislation compared in the Water Framework Directive, where the municipality, as a manager of the area, had to take into account whatever change was supposed to be, how that would affect the water quality. And the data we have today is more related to the sediments and related to smaller animals, but it could be useful to know more about the, for instance, chemical quality in the water. So I would say it's more related to what data is there at all. We try to find different researchers at different institutions, but we didn't find anything that was what we needed. So what I think is important, or what we should do in the future at least, is maybe reach out and see if there's a possibility to make such a project or to do that research for the future, because it's very important for the decisions that we have to make. But I also experienced that it goes both ways. It's both the municipality that should be more open and go out and reach out and say, hey, we need this. There are a lot of funds you can search for to get these sort of projects going. But I think it's also the other way around, that these organizations could reach out to the municipality more, so that they know where they could perhaps focus their research as well. So yeah, but in this case it was the data that was missing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the same kind of question goes to you, Annika. Where do you see this communication needs, and where do you see the possibility of establishing channels of communication with organizations who could provide necessary data? Is that something where you have a clear vision on it? And how much of that would be potentially on a national scale, or even a regional scale for, let's say, northern Sweden in your case, or how much would be on an international scale? Oh, yeah, we have a second.
Yeah. I just want to. It's important to know that the municipality has different roles. You're talking about the authority role of the municipality. I'm mostly at the system owner, pushing people forward role of the municipality. So it's important for services, as we're talking about today, to have that in mind, that we need very, very specific data for planning and whatever environmental legislation we need to follow. But we also need this more implemented public, what I'm talking about, films, storytelling, stories, scenarios, whatever, pictures, concluding data into a, maybe as a scientist, I don't know if it's hard to say, okay, this is maybe not true with all the data, but if we need these scenario pictures in order to make something happen, and in order to make our our politicians make. I mean, as you said, my politicians aren't climate scientists either. So they need correct, but they also need simplified pictures of what to make the right decisions. And I think, I mean, now I work in a Nordic country, and we have these really good, both local, regional, national levels of authorities. So, I mean, for us, maybe it's not that, okay, we need to put it on a certain level, but of course it's, but locally, it's also that we need to move fast in the municipality, and we have scarce resources. And we have, I don't know, maybe you're alone in your position. We have 5 people working with stuff. So we need also these regional authorities, for example, in Sweden. We are talking a lot to them that they need to take responsibility for making maps, for example, how the climate change is happening in our region and locally in Umeå, and what we should do. So these, it's a mix of where to put it. It's not an easy answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. And now I would like to ask you, Brynjar, and then afterwards I would like to come back to the specific services we have been showing from Arctic Passion and get your feedback on those. So you mentioned the importance of indigenous communities to get involved into those plannings and so on, and that is of course something which can only be managed on the local or regional scale. That's not something where the international research projects or so can come in, but in a similar way as I've been asking Annika and Agnete, where do you see the specific needs for information tools on what's going on a larger and down to a local scale from indigenous communities? You have seen the examples from the services for the permafrost, for example, or also the air pollution. Where do you see here the need for establishing these communication channels which are clear to the outside? So that is something we are struggling with in Arctic Passion, to be honest, how to make sure that the structure of Arctic observing is transparent, is clear to people, so they know I have a certain need for information and I can go to this organization and say, this is what we need for the next 5 years. Let's get into a dialogue how to make that happen. So I would like to hear your view on this. Are there any specific needs you could formulate? How much of that, for example, does make sense to be formulated by single communities, which is quite a high burden also in terms of workload? Or should this rather go through, let's say, organizations like the Sami Council in the case for Scandinavia, or the ICC in Canada or Greenland? So where do you see these potential future ways on information needs?
No, and that's an interesting balance, right? Because I believe really strongly that if you have an indigenous area or a group of indigenous people living in an area, data about that area belongs to the people living there. And you have to coordinate and plan projects relating to that in a way where that is respected and taken care of. Because data is very valuable in this modern world, you know? It's the future oil and gold, right? So you have to balance that. You have to make sure that those groups are involved, are able to communicate their needs, their wants, and veto anything that goes against what they want to happen in their area and in the area they own. But the other balance, as you're mentioning, is a normal Sami person living in Northern Norway can't have like 70 meetings a week where they have to agree to a different science project planned for everywhere around the world. It can't be every single person's responsibility. So there has to be some kind of organized form of that. You have to have organizations working, and there are works being done on getting those dialogues established and having kind of constant dialogues between the research community and indigenous community and local communities. But it is still very important that those are not ignored, even when that slows a project down, even when that makes it go slower, be harder, more difficult, more work, more expensive. You still need to respect those needs and those values, I think. And the other thing is, I believe that in the long run you can end up producing better science because of it, and better data and better research. Because a lot of the times, I believe most people who've been researchers all their lives will at some point have gathered a lot of data about some topic and then presented it to the world and been met with kind of a dude, no one cares attitude, because you haven't hit stuff that is relevant to the people living in the area, to the people that are going to use that data and who are going to work on that research in the future. So having those kind of dialogues, I think, will in the end produce better research, better data, better information that will be more usable by the people living in those communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. Point taken. So maybe now would be time to open up for the floor, and maybe I can ask our 3 service creators to come to the floor as well. And Patty will moderate this, and I can be the guy walking around with the microphone.
I can moderate from the floor,
okay,
actually.
Then moderate from the floor.
So
but I would like also to say that also our 3 guests should have the opportunity also to say a few words about the services if you want to,
sure.
As well as the floor. And
so
now I step back.
Is the floor, who's going to have the first question? I would ask that your question be a question and not a statement, but Jim Gamble is going to lead by example. Jim.
Please tell us who you are as well. Thanks, Patty. I'm Jim Gamble with Pacific Environment based in Anchorage, Alaska. And so I think this question relates to everybody, maybe to help us with some context, but also to talk about possibilities. So this is a system trying to make data not just available, but also useful for communities. And I'm wondering how you feel about opportunities around involving community members themselves through community-based monitoring. So in other words, giving them the tools to make the observations. And I've certainly seen in small rural Alaska communities that that makes what's happening very vital to people, and they feel a part of it. So it's probably something you've worked with or are working on or have already included, but I'm just curious about where you see that.
Thanks. I think it would be great to hear from someone on the service side and also someone on, you guys are standing on 2 sides of the stage. It's really, so who would like to take this from a service perspective and then maybe a user perspective?
Yeah, maybe I can answer this or give a comment on it. So I've been working in Alaska for a long time also, so I know that indigenous communities, non-indigenous communities are very interested in this kind of permafrost data, in our case specifically. There are some community-based monitoring efforts going on already in these regions. In our specific case for the remote sensing service, it's a little bit more difficult. Making this connection to ground-based monitoring with the remote sensing monitoring would be super interesting, definitely. And so I can see lots of potential to connect this, the future efforts of ground-based community monitoring, where citizen scientists basically are involved in these kind of activities and provide ground truth for the scientists to make the service better, but also enhance the output from the service that communities can use it in a much more efficient way, let's say it this way.
Anniken or Agneta, do you have a comment on that?
Does
Yeah,
this work?
that totally works, yeah.
That definitely works. I could say I work with air pollution, for instance, and I know that it's been done in a lot of other Norwegian municipalities, and we have looked into doing the same thing here. But it's a bit challenging in terms of the weather, and it's a bit more tiring. You have to have, because you're here in Tromsø, you need to have stronger equipment, more expensive equipment for it to work either way. But results in, for instance, I think Bergen have shown that it's engaging people a lot, and they become more aware of the air pollution, PM10, for instance, and when they should and shouldn't bike near the road, for instance, and why the road closes at certain points of the day, or so we have looked into it. We just have to. It has to be. The politicians has to approve, and it's the economy part of it. But we have looked into it, and hopefully we will get it up and running at some point. Yep.
Anniken, I'd like you to comment as well, and I'm going to maybe put you on the spot and ask you about some of the gender-based analysis that you have done and where that feedback is coming from, but unless you had something else that's more relevant to mention.
Actually, I don't know.
Okay, go ahead. Do your thing.
No, I was just spinning off in a direction of open data because we try to work a lot with open data in Umeå. We're not the best at all, but I think this is in the area of, as you said, if people, and that's, I liked you said normal people can use the data to figure out what's happening here and how can I use it and what can we do with it. I think that's very important. That doesn't, you don't need the normal people to collect the data, but if you make it open, they can use it in their way, what way they want. If we talk about, maybe I can just spin on that gender issue. We work a lot with gender equality questions in Umeå, so we try to have data always differed in, so you can look at it with the gender perspective. And it's obvious in Umeå when you look at mobility and transports that if, this is a statement I usually make, if men traveled like women, our sustainable mobility goals they would have been met years ago. And that's not saying because I want to point out that men are very bad, but we need to know that in order to make the right actions. So it's very serious, actually. If we don't know that, we would have made other actions which had been wrong. So yeah, these kind of differ data.
That's great. Thank you so much. Brynjar, do you have a tiny comment, and then I'm going to get another
super
question.
Quick comment.
Perfect.
Because I just want to say, because I think that is maybe like my biggest takeaway from this is the availability that these kind of tools produce. Because you just had some quick presentations. I haven't had time to really interact with the software, but already I got an understanding of what these kind of maps are showing, what the kind of data is showing. I felt like I understood, and I'm an idiot, and even I got something out of it. So that's a really good sign for you guys. So I think those tools can be really important for democratizing this kind of research in the future.
We'll take our next question.
Yeah, thank you all for great talks here. I'm Ina-Helena Alkvist. I'm from Sintef Ocean. So you're talking a lot about this collaboration and communication between like general public, policymakers, and scientists. But I wonder from your perspectives, who should take the responsibility to see these actions through? Like, who should take lead to ensure this collaboration and communication, and so that we hear each other? Thanks.
It's like a Reservoir Dog moment where everybody points at everybody else.
No, I think actually the Arctic Forum is, I mean, there are a lot of these organizations. You're the responsible part.
Perfect.
No, but I mean, we have these organizations in order to information and input from and to cities, to the scientist community. We need to have them in order to have this. It has to be a joint responsibility. It can't be either side. But the joint responsibilities, I think it's very important that we take that and we say that we want this and we should have it in these different organizations. Tomorrow the AURC is launching. It's an EU initiative with also Arctic cities. That's another organization which can, where you can talk about these questions. And in Umeå, we're also part of this. We have this very large biosphere reserve, the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in our area. And the biosphere reserve in the Arctic areas are many. And these are also areas where you can talk about these things.
Maybe adding a bit from the simple researcher's perspective is that funding, money talks. So that's another part of the solution. Arctic Passion is one example of a project where the European Commission has told us that it's wise in the project proposal to include this dialogue and strengthen it. And it makes perfect sense for me as a scientist, because it would allow me to have my data being used in different ways and better ways than before. So I think that funding is an important mechanism in this as well.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to jump in here and say that this is more, I'm going to say my normal line that I say, which is I think that we have the mechanisms in place in the Arctic. What we need to do is support those mechanisms. Arctic Mayors Forum is an example. Arctic Economic Council can deal with other things. Arctic Council, we have the mechanisms in the Arctic governance system already, but what we need to do is get the money in the right places so that Arctic organizations that are from the Arctic and work for the Arctic are funded in the ways that we can actually get onto these European Union funded projects in a meaningful way and include all of the population and demographics in the projects from design to implementation and beyond. I want to take one more question, and Agneta, I'll maybe let you get the first response if it's relevant. So please say your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Sherston Lyon. And I'm curious, you're talking about making data available to communities and working with Indigenous communities. And I'm just curious, in what ways are you working with Indigenous communities to take advantage of their Indigenous knowledge, to frame some of your questions, or to influence your data?
Great, we'll start with you, Agneta, and then just go down the line.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that as well, but it's more for her question.
Sure, go ahead.
But yeah, I was going to say that I think it's very important for the municipality to reach out and figure out what they actually need of data, and yeah, work that out and formulate their needs, and then reach out. But I also think it's important that the organizations sometimes maybe reach out and perhaps be like, hey, is there something you need? We're working on this. Is there something you maybe need within this field? Or should we cooperate and figure out some financial agreement? I don't know, to get funds, for instance. But yeah, I think it's important. I don't feel that the municipality is good enough to do that. They tend to, just lock in on what they're supposed to do and think that the information that's there is enough. But I think the municipality needs to be a bit more on, from my experience at least. Anyway, yeah.
Maybe on to the question about integrating Indigenous knowledge into the work of the services, and also from a user perspective. So who would like to pick up on that question? Go ahead, Ilaria.
Well, I'm not sure about Indigenous knowledge I'm talking about the service that we are developing. So in this case, maybe it would be, at first I think as a scientist, we always think about science. So we rather, we should really change our mindset at first. So thinking about to who we are addressing to and our services. So as she said, it's very important, but maybe once we start thinking about a research, or in this case, a services, we think about who we want to address, and we should make contact with them first to understand if what we have in mind could really work, and if I need it or not, or we need maybe something similar, but slightly different. So in this case, I think this dialogue is really important. And regarding, in this case, Indigenous knowledge, I don't, for my case, I don't know, maybe for Guido is more related to his service, but even maybe more what the municipalities is experiencing, like for pollution, if they notice that they have some health issues that are increasing over the years, or they are how the community itself is monitoring, so they know many people suffering from, I don't know, asthma or other issues. This is still an information that should come up and be transferred to I don't know, to other levels. But so this could be very important.
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe add a comment here, because our permafrost service is very often directly relevant to indigenous communities. So in our specific case, we had contact before we set up the service, like with the community in Kotzebue, for example, the native council there, the Northwest Arctic Borough, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, with the campus there in Kotzebue, the Northwestern Arctic campus. We talked to people in Nome as well, and try to incorporate, like, are the things that we envision, are they useful to you? What kind of specific issues or hazards do you see in terms of permafrost? Is that something that we should highlight in a future service? And so we try to incorporate some of this into service. But of course, there's potential for way more work in this direction. So getting feedback from the communities, so that's why we go back to these communities, which is also the issue of trust again. So not just being a one-time issue, we go there and receive the knowledge and don't show up again. But we want to go back, get feedback, give information to the people locally, and then to make the service more valuable for both sides, actually. And then so on the issue of funding that was raised also, so we totally understand, that was mentioned also by you, so there's lots of scientists descending onto indigenous communities, so how can they handle all those scientists interested in Arctic change? It's not possible, right? So some communities do have people working on some of these issues, sustainability measures. Some communities don't have that at all, like especially small communities. So how can we deal with that? So I think from the funder's perspective, things need to change as well. Not just to fund the science side of things, but also at the same time fund the applied side. And maybe even before the actual science proposal is decided. So to develop joint proposals, the communities need funding before that. Otherwise, they don't have any people like working on this because they have lots of other stuff to do, right? And we know from the science side, proposals have funding success rates of 20% if it's really good, but maybe less.
And
so
we need to design that from the beginning.
Exactly.
Right?
So it needs a system that has to change in this direction.
We always run out of time, which is a sign of a good discussion. So I'm going to hand it over now to Michael to close. But thank you very much from me. So just stay where you are.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I wish we had another half hour to carry on with these discussions. I would just like to stress, or let's say underline, some of the things which have been said in the very last. We are banging at the doors of the funding agencies, the European Commission and so on, since a few years, trying to make their funding schemes more open to allow involvement of indigenous and local communities from the very start on, ideally even from the call formulations on, not only at a too late stage and without funding. So we are trying that, and I think we need to carry on doing that. And about indigenous knowledge, this is also something we are going to have interesting sessions at the Arctic Observing Summit in Edinburgh in end of March, where some of the sessions are actually directed towards how to better include indigenous knowledge and science together to work on solving our problems, to become more holistic in our approaches. Thank you very, very much, and thank you, Patty and Arild and Marit, for co-organizing this. Thank you to our panelists and our session providers and all the participants in the room, and see you around. If you have any more questions, just approach us.